Welcome to the Lost Signals Discusses Literature,
where we apply the revolutionary Mott scale
to classic and contemporary works of prose.
So, join us once again, won't you?
Hello there, and welcome back to Lost Signals Discusses and Reviews Literature. Tonight, we're going to discuss a story by Neil Gaiman called A Study in Emerald. I remain your host, Scott Thurlow, joined by Jonathan Ian Manzer.
Hello.
And Stephen Amosi.
Hello. Ian, sorry, is your microphone on?
Yes.
Okay. All right, I got you now.
It is indeed on.
Speaking to the mic.
Okay. Well, given that I think you have the logline for this story, so hit us.
Shadow over Holmesmith.
Indeed. And we're about to tell you why. So actually, Steve was about to tell you why with the plot. Go ahead, buddy.
So this kind of follows a Sherlock Holmesian story. It's called A Study in Emerald, which is a takeoff of A Study in
Right, it's a
Scarlet.
reference to that.
And it begins with two characters who are seemingly Sherlock and Watson trying to figure out what's going on with a murder that has happened. They kind of let Lestrade bumble around and
Lestrade be Lestrade, too much.
try and figure out what's going on unsuccessfully, while Sherlock embarrasses him at every turn. I'm sorry. As you
our
find
main
out later,
detective,
our friend embarrasses him at every turn. Eventually, it turns out that they are trying to search out these two villains who don't like the new old one overlords that have come upon the earth for whatever reasons. They don't actually find them. It's a very Sherlock.
Well, they do find them, but
that's true. They find them to the extent that they are allowed to be found. Right, a very Sherlockian thing.
Yes,
like turn of events.
Yeah, exactly.
Eventually, their villains get away, and in a little twist, it turns out that it is Sherlock and Watson they've been chasing the entire time, leaving you to surmise that it is Moriarty and I forget what the other guy's
Sebastian
name is.
Moran.
Yeah, Moran, who are the protagonists of this.
Or at least the
story.
point of view characters, yes.
Interestingly enough. So, it's a fairly short story, really well told in like a in the vein of a Sherlock story.
Exactly.
And with a nice little twist at the end. So hopefully you read it before listening to this because I just ruined the shit out of it for you.
Even if so, read it knowing the twist. I still think it's an interesting story, but
yeah. I dug it. I thought that the plot, while being basically a recycled Sherlock plot, was well done. I always like Gaiman's writing and the way that he develops stories. And I'm probably going to give this a 3 as far as a short story goes. I don't think there's much in there to be taken off on. It's, a standard Arthur Conan Doyle like plot line, which...
I mean, it is an Arthur Conan Doyle plot line because it's basically a retelling of A Study in Scarlet.
Exactly. So it's tough to fault that in terms of plot,
Well, to be fair, the setup of this with the writer coming back from Afghanistan, them trying to find an apartment, the writer becoming part of his friend's investigations. That's all Study in Scarlet. The actual crime is different than than what is in Study in Scarlet, which is the cab driver that is a serial killer. But nonetheless, I think this is another.
It's a pastiche of like a number of Doyle's original stories,
and I think he unfolds it's obvious. Like I'm a big Sherlock Holmes fan. It's obvious from like the first paragraph what they're doing with it, but it's also that opening line with the twist, like that kind of reflection upon what's underneath the waters and all of that.
Yeah,
and then it falls right into what is this kind of the standard Study in Scarlet. I thought it was very effective. I like the fact that they don't keep the reveal of the old ones. They basically establish that right off
It's
the
pretty
bat.
early on, yeah.
The real reveal is the switching of the point of view. And for that, I give it... I'm probably going to give it a 2.
Okay.
Because I don't think it's more of a play upon Arthur Conan Doyle than creating anything lasting.
Sure. I mean, this is my choice. Spoiler. So I read the story a couple of times, and it just happened to come up again. And yeah, I've always liked it. But to be fair, so it's weird because, or not weird, but per se, but when I originally read it, I wasn't as familiar with the Sherlock. Like, of course, I knew what I knew, like by osmosis, but I hadn't actually read as many, if any, original Sherlock stories when I did read it. So I was more like somewhat lost, if you will. Like, I didn't get as many of the connections and the callbacks and the references and so forth. And then years later, I did read more and I knew more. So when I read it again, I got more of it. I always got the Lovecraft stuff, of course, because I was always into Lovecraft, even originally. But I am going to give it probably a 3 because maybe this come up in style. Because, yeah, you're right. Like, it does kind of assume and hinge upon the fact that you should, if you know a lot of the stuff, then you get more out of it. Like, the reveal of it being Moriarty and Sebastian, like, not Sherlock and Watson and all that. But it does create, like, a nice little world where, like, all these things exist. Like, for example, the format I happen to find it in is, like, sort of like a recreation of, like, the old newspaper, like, Penny Dreadful stuff. So it was, like, advertisements for Victor's Vitae and shit like that, like, references to Frankenstein, references to Dr. Jekyll and all that stuff, which maybe is more style. But I thought plot-wise, it's cut up very nicely. Yeah, it's not that long. It's cut up in, like, 4 or 5 little parts. And it follows, like, a detective story in the vein of Sherlock, and sort of, like, as you said, Gaiman sort of emulating Doyle's original style. But I think it's strong enough for me, and maybe it's a little biased, but still, because, like I said, if you get the references, then sure. But even if not, I think it still stands. I think it's, again, cut up very nicely and paced out, so I'm going to give it a solid 3, I think.
That's fair.
But I can see it too. All right, and it's on to me with themes. Don't let Lovecraftian monsters overrule the world. I don't know, like...
Well, oh, man, that seems like everything's going really well.
Or apparently do let them, because everything is under a banner of peace under their monstrous rule.
It's a 700-year Victorian era.
Yeah.
And you know what? I think we would benefit from that.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe.
I, for one, welcome our monster
God
overlords.
damn you. I was going to use that as my sign-off line.
Sorry.
God damn it. I, for one, welcome the old one overlords. But either way, like, I mean, it's just a detective story, really. So, like, there are certainly some themes in it, but I'm not sure if it's, like, the main focus of it. This is more like sort of, again, a pastiche, like an homage to this stuff. Mm-hmm. So it's not really, like, saying anything, like, deep. Certainly, I don't think it's devoid of themes, but I don't think it's one of those stories that Gaiman wrote with, like, a strong theme in mind. But I'll open up to you guys. What do you think?
It's clever. I'll give it granted that, but I don't think it's particularly deep. And
that's kind of where I'm standing, yeah. Even though I think normally I like his stuff, and Gaiman can, in fact, imbue his writings with some very deep and meaningful themes. Mm-hmm. I just think in this exercise, that wasn't really the goal or the point. So, what do you think, Steve-O?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both of you. I don't think that it was... I think that he was trying to, like, dash off a
clever little thing.
Yeah, you know, it's like... It's like Wicked, basically.
Sure.
You know, he just wanted to do a Sherlock story that has a twist. Oh, hey, it's not Sherlock. Okay, that's where the cool part of the story comes in. And like, I don't take anything away from him for that, except for this point on themes.
Right. Yeah. It's sort of default. Like, you know.
So this probably should have gotten back in the plot, but it reminded me of a what if from a comic book. Like, what if Lovecraft conquered Sherlock
Sherlock's world. Yeah. That's funny.
Like, that's exactly kind of. But again, nothing to take away from it. I think it was a very clever story.
Yeah, I think again I think we're all giving zeros to themes and through no fault of the story, but again, not quite the focus. I will say, if I didn't mention it, that this story did originally appear in a collection of like, it was all specifically like Sherlockian like style stuff. Mm-hmm. It's like, again, pastiches of Sherlock stories. So it was written specifically to appear in an anthology of such. Okay. So that little fact may or may not change anything, but that's indeed like why he originally wrote it. All right, so we'll go on to Antagonist with you, E.
The tall man and the
limping doctor.
Slenderman.
Sure.
John Slenderman.
Again, are they effective antagonists? Well, they're Arthur Conan Doyle antagonists sure. For like his short pieces. I like. Granted, the meaning behind them is more for the reveal at the end, but did like? I'm going to give it a 1, not because of necessarily the strength of the characters, but for what the purpose they serve in this narrative is, and the fact that they're clues.
Yeah, I mean, go, Steve.
Well, I think the strength of the characters in this story is the like biting antagonism of the mind in the mind of our, protagonists.
Sure.
In the same way that Moriarty
Would be
always
this
gnaws
opposite,
on Sherlock's mind, like the tall man, right? Obviously, Sherlock is gnawing on his mind in this. And there's one, also in terms of Watson, there's one line that I really like when he says, like, when doctors go bad, they're like worst monsters ever.
Yeah, that was
something like that. And like, I love that. It was like talking about how the like acid, the guy that like, put people in acid, or like, all these doctors.
They know how to kill
just,
people
like,
efficiently.
monsters.
Yes.
Yeah, which I really dug.
Also, but also that knowledge that this is made for a collection. Granted, all the character building of both the protagonist and the antagonist are stemmed from our knowledge of Sherlock
Sure.
Holmes.
Like I said, it sort of leans on some of that
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, yeah, so are you giving it a 1 then, Steve-O?
Yes.
As well? Yeah, like, I sort of agreed to what you said outright to start off with E, that, like, it's there enough, and I'll build on what you said, like, the antagonized, how Moriarty, after the reveal, is, like, it's clear that it is weighing upon him. Like, and I had the line picked out at the very end, because this is, again, as a parallel, it's originally, right, Watson is writing the accounting of their story, so now it's Sebastian, and he says at the end, I doubt my friend, by which he means Moriarty, will leave it alone, though it will not be over until one of them has killed the other. So, like, even he, like, gets a sense of the antagonistic relationship between, the classic mortal enemies, if you will, even though if it's being told from the opposite end that you normally would see it. So for all that, I think I'm going to give it a solid enough 1 as well, because I think there's enough there, and certainly they feel antagonized by it to an extent, or at least trying to figure out, all the clues and chase them down. All right, so 1's around, so let's go to Protagonist, and that'll be you, Steve-O.
Yeah, I guess it's, Moriarty and Sebastian, and they do a very good Sherlock Watson impression throughout this story, which
it's funny.
Which it was. I really like the characters, and I really enjoyed like reading this story and having them in it. It's a Neil Gaiman story, so it's got a flow to it that like really he imparts on his short stories to some of the best extent that I've ever seen in writing. For me, like I love reading his stories because he's almost like that Stephen King style of writing where
exactly.
it's like it's not like a template per se, but it's got that like page turner feel to it all the time.
Yeah, it's well said.
And that definitely helps with the protagonist who you spend most of the time with in this story. So I'm going to give him a strong 1. I don't think that there's much I can say against them as characters.
Yeah, I feel it. Same deal.
I said, all of my thoughts that I went to antagonist
apply here as well.
Protagonist.
Yeah, and I sort of logically don't have much more to add. They're sort of mirrors of each other, and so that means they're going to be just as effective in a sense. And I think that's no exception here.
Yes.
All right, so that'll bring me, in fact, to secondary. So this one was somewhat wavering on. There's not many, like, I guess you can count, like, Lestrada's there, of course, because he's a known character within the mythology, so he sort of has to be there. He's like, I think I alluded to, he's bumbling as ever, like, he's clueless. He has no idea what's going on. That's why he calls on the consulting detectives, just in this case, it's not Sherlock. But there's also the Lovecraftian overlords. They meet the Queen, who is a Lovecraftian monster of some kind, and they describe her, I think, it's Queen Victoria Gloriana, right? And there's a line in there something like, we called her Victoria because she was victorious, meaning against humanity.
Because she defeated us like 600 years ago or something like that.
Yeah, and also the Queen because that's the word, a title that the human tongue can pronounce or something like that. So like, there's not as many there, but what is there I think is enough. Lestrade certainly, like I said, kind of stands out because of him set against both the protagonist and antagonist.
Mrs. Hutchinson.
Yeah, she's there for like a line or two as well, sure.
Just like she is in the...
Yes, exactly. What exactly is the point of view, I think is what he says to her. But yeah, I mean, like, I was going to maybe give it a soft 0, but I think you could also be convinced to give it a soft 1 because it's solid enough. So unless you guys have an argument.
All right. I'm actually going to encompass the next 3.
Okay.
In 1.
Fair enough. Oh, yeah. I think I know what you're about to say. Go on.
This is an imitation of Arthur Conan Doyle. And imitation is one of the hardest things to actually pull off because you pull off oftentimes the surface elements of something, but not necessarily like
Right.
the deeper thing. So yeah, Gaiman is here because he's the writer. The things he can't control about his writing, and there are things that he thinks he can control but he can't because it's part of his nature, come through. And I would never say that would it be a lost piece by Arthur Conan Doyle. However, especially because there's Lovecraftian creatures in there, but but just like style wise,
I get what you mean.
dialogue wise, but it's a heck of an imitation. And he hits all of the surface and even sometimes like a little deeper notes that you need in there. So yeah, Lestrade has to be there because this is an imitation of a Sherlock. Mrs. Hutchinson has to be there.
Yeah,
this is Sherlock. And I think he handles them all the same way Arthur Conan Doyle did. Dialogue-wise, character-wise, style-wise. So those are all three are getting ones on the imitation angle.
I got you.
So you're doing style, dialogue, and supporting all ones?
Because of the imitation, because
it emulates it so well. He's saying, yeah, I get you.
I agree with you to a large extent. Although I don't know if I'm going to give supporting a 1. I think I'm leaning towards a 0 at the moment, just because there's not like Lestrade is fine,
but he's not that complex of a character
to begin with. That's what he's saying.
Arthur Conan Doyle.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Like he's not, and there,
That's a good point.
Certainly, if anything, Gaiman in this very short story takes something away from him. Like maybe not even really, but like
he's more one-dimensional than
he's incredible. He's character.
He's a buffoon. Whereas like in some of the old Doyle stuff, he had a little bit more heft to him. I would say perhaps not much, but like so I think I'm going to give supporting a 0. But if we're answering the next two questions, those are getting big ones. But I think we should maybe go a little more in depth.
We'll speak more about them. But you're giving secondary 0.
Yeah.
See, like that almost convinced me. I'm still kind of wavering.
Here's the thing: you should give Arthur Conan Doyle a 0 for his depiction of Hutchinson and.
Sure.
All right.
Extra
That's
question.
Funny.
He does
on a scale of 11.
That's also a good point.
He imitates it as he needs to. He can't. If he added any elements to them,
then it wouldn't
be honest to what.
I think that's going to push me over the edge for a solid 1. Yeah. Although I get your argument as well, Steve-O, and perfectly fine that you're giving it a 0. But nevertheless, let's just move on to dialogue, and that'll be you, Ian.
Again, I don't think Arthur Conan Doyle did great dialogue. I think that he did Sherlock Holmes fairly well because, listening to the deductions, but listening to Watson, or in this case, Sebastian, muse about the wonders of his detective partner, or again, I give it a 1 for the imitation. I would give maybe, depending on like if it's not, it can't be anything more than that,
right?
Because
I get what you're saying for sure. Yeah.
I don't know if I 100% agree with that. I would say that he does do a very good job of imitating the style of dialogue that Doyle does, but I think that Gaiman has a slightly defter touch,
a flair
with dialogue than he does, and I actually prefer the dialogue in this to like. I mean, it's been a long time since I've read an Arthur Conan Doyle story, but I think I prefer the dialogue in this to that. It reads a little more fluidly, I think.
I might agree with that too.
Yeah, that's really well said.
So I'm going to give dialogue a 1 for this because I really enjoyed the dialogue throughout.
I'm pretty much going to piggyback on that. Like I don't have much more to add, but I think that is pretty spot on, and probably the reason I'm going to also give it a 1. So let's move on to style, indeed, Steve-O.
Yeah, I love the style of this. The takeoff of Sherlock Holmes stories with the added H.P. Lovecraft elements, with like the added like newspaper styling of the story. Yeah. Everything is about style in this. Like where we took off points and themes, I'm giving all those points of style because that's where all of it ended up. That's where all that energy ended up, I think. And it is, I really love it. It captures the feel, like with these little like stylistic elements, it captures the feel of like an old story, but it feels like something, completely new as well out of that. And I won't say too much more about the style in terms of that because I know you guys have a couple things to say as well, but I really loved it, so I'm gonna give it a 1.
No, I pretty much agree. And like you said, yes, it's a good emulation, so that shines through. And he's always very good about like when he does a homage like this, he's pretty spot on. But I'm going to mention sort of a bit more in depth that the the link that I found that we'll put up when we put this episode up for the story is that, yeah, you should read it this way because of the formatting of it, because it recreates the feel of reading it in a newspaper as if you were like, in turn of the century London. So I thought that was really cool. Like all the ads are really like with a little picture on them and stuff, and the references to the other Gothic, like I said, Dr. Jekyll and Dracula and stuff is all in there. So that's really solid. It creates a nice effect. But just again, in general, like Gaiman's always very good about it, and he's one of my favorite writers, and for a reason. And I'm pretty much always going to give him probably a 1 on style, and definitely in this one.
I have nothing more to say. You guys covered it all, and I also covered it when I did all 3 in 1.
1's all around to style, and it'll bring me to recommendation. Yes, I did. But here's the thing, right? Maybe it goes back to what I said before, that I probably would generally recommend the story, but I would also throw in a caveat and be like, you might not get as much out of it if, again, you're not familiar with Arthur Conan Doyle or Sherlock as a character, and also some H.P. Lovecraft shit. Like, you know what I mean? Like, if you had no idea or like less dealings with them, and you just read the story cold, you might not enjoy it as much, or might not understand like what he's going for. So that's kind of a possible sticking point.
This is a niche piece.
Yeah, exactly.
Except that I think like Sherlock Holmes has had a great ability to last throughout the ages. If you never read a Sherlock Holmes piece, but you were familiar with the Sherlock Holmes television show or Elementary or any of those things, you can see like elements of the thing. And I happen to have read a number of the so yeah, it spoke to me, but I think that you could really actually get it even if you had just the general knowledge of it. So I'm going to give it a 1.
I will agree with that, and I'll add to it, actually. I think that even if you didn't know anything about Sherlock Holmes, but you were just a fan of, this old style literature, like short story type literature, and you wanted to see like a new take on it, or like a new way of looking at it, I think you would enjoy this anyway. I'm going to definitely recommend it. Check it out. It's a fun story. It's fairly short. It's like 9 pages long. So
yeah.
It's any like for me, I don't know. I'm a fanboy of
yes.
Neil
I mean,
Gaiman
admittedly,
as well. Like
we're in the same boat.
Like anything that he writes, just it has this flow to it that just makes it seem like you need to keep reading, and it makes the time seem to go more quickly, I think, when you're reading stuff of his.
Sure, it's never a slog, so, I would say.
I mean, I'm definitely going to recommend it. And you know what? I recommend reading anything that he's written, to be honest. But
yeah.
Well, I'm not as big of a fan, but I definitely enjoyed this one.
Yeah, so. That's fair. So like I said, Sivo, that's pretty much what I would have maybe said, even given my caveat. But at the end of the day, you guys, I think I'm been convinced that, yeah, I'd still generally recommend it because you can still get something out of it. Maybe just more if you're more familiar, again, with the material it's referencing. But even so, it still stands. And yeah, I pretty much always, admittedly, again, am a huge fan of Neil Gaiman in general. So
yeah, absolutely.
All right, so that'll do it. I will give out the scores now. I've given it a 9 with the highest score, and you guys, I think, have given it 8s if I've kept up correctly, which gives us an 8.3, I believe.
Yep, 8.3.
Correct. I can do math. I don't need Sherlock or Moriarty to come help me do math. I finally do it. So yeah, 8.3 overall, and it's pretty damn solid. It's a high score, and I think it's almost spot on for, again, the nature and how the story unfolds. And it's really just an enjoyable nice little read. Yeah. So, like I said, we'll put up a link, and you can enjoy it there yourselves. And any other final thoughts on our Sherlockian Shadows over Innsmouth Sherlock, etc.? No?
Sherlock over Innsmouth?
Yes, exactly. All right, well then, that'll do it for this one. I've been Scott Thurlow, here with Jonathan Ian Manzer.
It's Lovecraft, my dear Sebastian.
And Stephen Amosi.
Watch out for old ones.
And we'll see you next time. Good night.
Editing and engineering by Scott Thurlow. Music by Christopher Morgan. Check us out on YouTube and iTunes for the shows, and on Facebook and Twitter for updates.